What is taking place in Syria and the rest of the Middle East is international news, you know that. But numerous other channels are saying it was also news 3,000 years ago when all of this was predicted by the prophet Amos. Now, just last week on this channel, we reported 7 prophecies that are related to Syria that will happen over the next 3.5 years. Did we happen to miss this one from Amos? Or isn't Amos's prophecy related to what's happening now and really related to something that's going to take place later? How can we tell? What is a prophecy about our current time and what isn't? We kind of need to know that. But one thing we could say for sure, as you're going to find out in this video, is that it is related to the coming of the 10 kings and their formation. So make sure you keep watching. In that prophecy, Amos speaks of the fall of Damascus, Lebanon, and the Philistine region. You know which region that is, right? And other countries that haven't yet fallen, but according to Amos, they're going to end soon. So I think we need to be able to tell if Amos was talking about 2024 or 2030, or what was he talking about? This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and today we're continuing our biblical prophetic coverage of the fall of Syria and Damascus. Last week, we examined the 7 prophecies that come next. There is a link to that landmark video, which has been very popular, at the end of this one. But today, we're examining another prophecy that is all over the internet. But is it talking about our time or a later time? And for this video, a shout out goes to Stephen Welp for researching this important topic for us. Now, specific passages from the biblical book of Amos, written about 3,000 years ago, seem to foretell events happening in the last few weeks involving Israel and its neighbors. These are the passages referred to in the other videos. Amos foretold the destruction of Damascus, the capital of modern Syria, stating, "For 3 sins of Damascus, even for 4, I will not relent." According to the other videos on this subject, this prophecy refers to the breaking and destruction of Damascus's ruling authority. These videos also warn about the land of the Philistines. Amos says, "I will set fire on the walls of Ga'ah," and you know what that is, "that will consume her fortresses." These videos interpret this as a direct reference to the repeated conflicts between Israel and the Hammis, with heavy artillery and airstrikes devastating Ga'ah's infrastructure. And, you might wonder why we say it that way. Well, because that's the only way we're allowed to say it on this particular channel. Amos's focus on Tyre, a prominent city in modern Lebanon, also figure in these videos. About Lebanon, Amos writes, "For 3 sins of Tyre, even for 4 I will not relent, because she sold whole communities of captives to Edom, disregarding a treaty of brotherhood." This is interpreted as a condemnation of Tyre's betrayal and complicity in the suffering of neighboring communities. But again, we have to ask, current time, future time? That's the question we'll be answering today. Plus, Amos speaks of a number of other nations, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, even Israel, being punished by God. So knowing if this passage in Amos is speaking of what's going on now, it's really important. Is Israel about to be punished? Is Saudi Arabia about to be punished? Let's find out. Hopefully from today's teaching, you'll see for yourself if prophecies are about current times or the day of the Lord or the return of Jesus. And we're going to help you to figure out how you can make that determination. Now, in our previous video, we discussed another passage that's even been in more videos, the Isaiah 17 prophecy about Damascus and its total destruction. Let's start there so you can see how we analyze these matters. Isaiah 17 discusses the destruction of Damascus, so it will never be inhabited as a city again. It also discusses the destruction of the surrounding Ararat region that extends into Jordan, and prophesies that Israel's population will be decimated to just a few percentages of what it is now. That last part in particular just doesn't seem likely before the day of the Lord and God's ultimate pouring out of wrath, does it? because Israel is going to put up a fight prior to the invasion of the Antichrist at the midpoint. So that is strike one against this being a current prophecy. Strike two is what Isaiah 17 says about Jesus and his presence in the land at that time. In that day, men will look to their Maker and turn their eyes to the Holy One of Israel. How does one turn their eyes to the Holy One unless he's already returned? These strikes against this prophecy tend to eliminate Isaiah 17 as happening anytime prior to the second coming. Now, let's look at what Amos says in Amos 1, 3-5, because that's really the focus of our teaching today. For 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they have threshed Gilead with threshing sledges of iron. So I will send a fire upon the house of Hazal, and shall devour the strongholds of Ben-Hadad. I will break the gate bar of Damascus. So why is God punishing Damascus? Because Damascus damaged the region of Gilead. Gilead is a mountainous region in Jordan. Did Syria just attack Jordan? No. Well, then that part hasn't been fulfilled, has it? Second, notice God is saying he will personally send fire upon the nation, and that God will personally break the gate of Damascus. Any damage to Damascus that we've seen, did God do this personally via his wrath, or did humans do it? No. God's wrath did not begin and will not begin until Revelation 6:17, which is after the 6th seal, when the sun and the moon go dark and the stars fall. Right now, he may permit human beings to destroy some things, but God is not doing it personally. So this is another reason to dismiss this as anything except a future prophecy about the day of the Lord when God will send fire and brimstone on the earth. He's going to send fire upon Damascus at that point, but not until that point. This is exactly similar to the land of the Philistines. Here's what Amos says about that place that initiated all the war that we've had in the Middle East over the last year. For 3 transgressions of Ga'ah, and you know again why we're not saying the word, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they carried into exile, that's interesting, a whole people to deliver them up to Edom. Amos 1:6. So we have to ask, did the Hammies carry off a whole people, or just a couple hundred? A couple hundred, right? And did they take them to Edom, which is Saudi Arabia? No, they carried them back to their own cities. Let's continue. So I will send a fire upon the wall of Ga'ah, and shall devour her strongholds. Again, did God destroy that region, or did Israel? This passage shows this also is something that hasn't happened yet. The Philistines are involved in taking people into exile. We saw that, but so far it's been limited. What this says is in the future, it's going to be a large group that get carried away. And this passage in Amos goes on and on about the other nations that will be judged at that same time: Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And in these cases, God is pouring fire on all of them. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet either. Now, that doesn't mean that this judgment isn't coming in the future. It is, upon the day of the Lord and his second coming. Then God will pour out fire and brimstone as recompense for what a lot of these places have done, but he isn't doing that now. To read these passages otherwise is to ascribe judgments to the present time and to places like Saudi Arabia and Israel when judgment isn't coming now. It's going to be delayed. So we need to be careful about what we see and what we hear about Damascus in the coming weeks, as it's just all over the internet. Now, what I find absolutely fascinating about these regions that are going to be judged, we got the Hammies, the Hezis, we've got Damascus, we've got Saudi Arabia, we've got Jordan, and we've got a portion of Israel. What do these areas have in common? Well, interestingly, they are the same nations found in the Psalm 83 passages. Yeah, the 10 people groups that I believe are going to come together to form a nation when the two-state solution happens. And if you're unaware, we believe that the Palestinian state that's formed will actually be a grouping of a number of these different people groups that will surround the nation of Israel like a ring of fire and possibly form the 10 kings. We have a whole teaching on this. We'll link that down in the description so that you can see it. But this is the same groups, the exact same groups as Psalm 83, and it shows what God does to them in the end. So I found that very interesting, and that kind of puts it in perspective why these groups are listed in Amos. Now, Jeremiah 49 has a similar passage about the judgment of Damascus that is also not about the present day. We'll just tell you right up and without analyzing it. And the oracle against Assyria in Isaiah 14 is about the future as well. So it is key to know what is and what isn't about the day we're living in, because videos come out all the time and all of us have to be discerning. So how can we be discerning about passages in the Bible to see if they're taking place on the day of the Lord or taking place perhaps in our own day? One of the most significant indicators in prophecy is identifying who is the agent of judgment. If a text describes human armies or earthly nations enacting punishment on a nation, it could point to a historical event, or it could be something that's an ongoing political struggle right now. It could be prophecy that's being fulfilled in front of our eyes. But passages that explicitly describe God himself as the direct agent of destruction almost always, not always, but almost always point to the day of the Lord. This is a future event characterized by divine wrath, ultimate justice, as outlined in the prophecies such as Isaiah 13:9 and Revelation 6:17. According to Revelation, God's wrath, after all, begins after the opening of the sixth seal, marking the transition into an unparalleled period of divine judgment on earth. Till that point in the prophetic chronology, God's direct intervention in judgment is very reserved. Another critical factor to consider is whether the passage describes Jesus as being physically present on the earth or visibly seen. The Bible emphasizes that Jesus' physical return will be unmistakable and central, but only happens on the day of the Lord. So, some practical steps for interpreting the timing of a passage are: 1. Examine the context. Who or what is described as the agent of destruction? Are there historical or geopolitical parallels to the event in the passage? 2. Does the passage align with the sequence of events leading up to or including the day of the Lord as described in Revelation? And 3. Is God's direct intervention or Jesus' physical presence described? If not, then it's likely referring to human-driven events, and it could be something that happens in your present time. But there are prophecies that are likely involving Syria, 7 of them, that we can be sure apply to the period prior to the midpoint. Some of these are underway, but none of them have been fulfilled just yet, but they're in process, and we can see what they are and what the next steps are. Click right here to keep watching and discover what these 7 prophecies are and how current events in the Middle East are related to them. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.